My name is Arthur Penn, and I am what you might call a creature of logic. As a software engineer, my world is one of binaries, of cause and effect, of problems that can be solved with clean, efficient code. I don't believe in ghosts, I don't read horoscopes, and I consider superstition to be a bug in the human operating system. That was, at least, who I was before I moved to Sycamore Lane. The move was a logical choice. After my company went fully remote, the city became an expensive, noisy liability. I wanted quiet, space, and a mortgage that didn't make me hyperventilate. The house at number 112 was perfect. A modest two-story home at the very end of a dead-end street with a small yard and a large sunlit room that was ideal for a home office. It was cheap, almost suspiciously so, but the inspector found nothing but the usual quirks of an older building. The only real downside was its neighbor. Number 114, the last house on the street, was a corpse. While the other homes on Sycamore Lane were neat and tidy, with manicured lawns and cheerful flower beds, this one was surrendering to entropy. Its paint peeled like sunburnt skin, the windows were boarded up with mismatched planks of wood, and the garden was a riot of weeds and thorns that clawed at a rusted, leaning fence. It was an eyesore, a blight on an otherwise pleasant suburban canvas. The real estate agent had assured me it had been empty for decades, tangled in some legal probate nightmare. "Don't worry," she'd said with a practiced smile. "You'll never even know it's there." For the first few weeks, she was right. I settled into a comfortable routine. I'd wake up, brew coffee, and work until the late afternoon, my silence punctuated only by the click of my keyboard and the distant hum of a lawnmower. I was in control, the architect of my own peaceful reality. My skepticism was a fortress, and my life was the orderly kingdom within its walls. The first intrusion was subtle enough to be ignored. It was a Tuesday night, close to 2 a.m. I was struggling with a particularly stubborn piece of code, and the house was tomb silent. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, rhythmic and low. Tap, 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 tap. It was distant, seemingly coming from the direction of the abandoned house. I paused, listening. A branch scraping against a wall in the wind, I reasoned. Or maybe the old pipes in my own house settling. I dismissed it and went back to work, the logical explanation satisfying the rational part of my brain. But a few nights later, it came again. Tap, 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 tap. This time, there was no wind. I walked to the window of my office, which faced number 114. The house stood inert and black against the moonless sky, a void in the shape of a home. The sound was clearer now, a dry, hollow knocking. It felt deliberate, not random, like a force of nature, but measured, like a signal. My mind, ever the problem solver, began cycling through possibilities. Raccoons in the attic? A loose shutter I couldn't see? Each explanation felt thin, a flimsy patch on a growing hole in my understanding of the world. The sound became a nightly companion. It wasn't constant, but it was consistent. It would start sometime after midnight and continue for an hour or two, a maddeningly patient beat that seemed to drill directly into my subconscious. I started sleeping with earplugs, then with a white noise machine, but I could still feel it, a vibration in the marrow of my bones. My fortress of logic was being besieged by the most primitive of weapons, a simple, inexplicable sound. I began to feel a strange, possessive curiosity about the derelict house. During the day, I would stare at it from my window, trying to peel back its layers of decay with my eyes. Who had lived there? Why was it left to rot? The house that I was supposed to never even know was quickly becoming the center of my universe. I was still a man of logic, but my problem now had a physical address. And I was beginning to fear that the solution was locked behind its decaying front door. My initial attempts at investigation were predictably modern and sterile. I spent hours on Google, searching the address of 114 Sycamore Lane, cross-referencing it with town records and old news articles. The digital world offered little. The house was registered to an estate with no living heirs, its history a collection of dry legal documents and unpaid property taxes. There were no sensational headlines, no salacious stories of murder or mayhem. It was just empty, forgotten, This lack of information was more frustrating than a gruesome discovery would have been. A ghost story would have at least provided a framework, a set of rules. This was just a void. The nightly tapping continued, an unwavering punctuation mark to my fruitless research. It felt like it was mocking me, a secret language I couldn't comprehend. My frustration drove me offline. I made a trip to the Oakhaven Municipal Archives, a musty old building downtown that smelled of decaying paper and forgotten time. The town archivist was a man named Mr. Abernathy, a wisp of a man with spectacles as thick as bottle glass and a passion for local history that bordered on the fanatical. He was the herald, the keeper of stories nobody else wanted. When I told him the address I was researching, his cheerful demeanor flickered. "Number 114, the Thorn Place," he said, his voice dropping a register. "Not many people ask about that one anymore. A sad story." He led me to a back room, a catacomb of rolling shelves and cardboard boxes. After a few minutes of searching, he pulled out a heavy, dust-caked file. "Here we are, the Thorn family." The file was a Pandora's box of mundane tragedy. The house was last owned by a man named Elias Thorn, a watchmaker who had lived there with his wife, Lenora. In the winter of 1978, Lenora had died suddenly from a swift and brutal illness. Elias, consumed by grief, became a recluse. The official records ended there, but tucked into the back of the file, bound with a brittle rubber band, was something else, a small, leather-bound journal, Elias Thorn's journal. Mr. Abernathy let me sit at a small desk to read it. The first few pages were filled with professions of love for Lenora, descriptions of her smile, the sound of her laughter. But after her death, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew jagged, frantic. Elias wrote about the silence of the house, how it was a physical weight pressing down on him. Then, a new entry made the blood in my veins turn to ice. December 12th, 1978. I hear her, not her voice. A tapping, a rhythm from inside the walls. Faint, but it is there. It is her signal. She is trying to reach me from the other side. I read on, my breath caught in my chest. Elias became obsessed. He believed Lenora was communicating with him through the rhythmic tapping. He developed a system, a code. 1 tap for yes, 2 for no. The journal was filled with his one-sided conversations. Are you at peace? Tap. Are you alone? Tap, tap. He was convinced he was talking to his dead wife. His friend, a man named Robert, mentioned frequently in the journal, tried to intervene. He brought a doctor to the house. Elias refused to let them in, screaming that they would sever his only connection to Lenora. Robert was my predecessor, the skeptic trying to rationalize the inexplicable. He eventually gave up, writing in a letter I found tucked between the pages. I fear he has lost his mind to that damned house. The final entries were a descent into pure madness. The tapping is stronger now. She is so close. It is not a signal from far away anymore. It is a scratching, like she is trying to get out, buried behind the stone in the cellar. I sealed it myself to keep the damp out, years ago. Oh God, what if she was not gone? What if she was only sleeping? The last entry was a single, terrifying sentence, scrawled across the page with such force that the pen had ripped the paper. I must let her out. After that, nothing. The official record stated that Elias Thorn simply vanished. They found the house empty. The cellar was undisturbed. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. The air in the archive felt heavy, suffocating. I finally understood. The sound wasn't a ghost. It was a memory, an echo of a man's grief-stricken madness that had somehow imprinted itself onto the very fabric of the house. An obsessive ritual, repeated nightly for years, had given it a life of its own. It was a psychic trap, baited with a sound. And now, it had my attention. As I walked out of the archives and into the fading afternoon light, a wave of pure terror washed over me. This wasn't a story from the past. I was living in the sequel. That night, as I lay in bed, the sound started, precisely on cue. Tap, 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 tap. But it was different now. Before, it was a mystery. Now, it was a message. And for the first time, I felt like it was addressed directly to me. I understood the awful truth. There was no escape. The knowledge itself was the cage. Knowing the origin of the sound did not bring peace. It brought a more profound, more intimate horror. The tapping was no longer just a noise from next door. It was Elias Thorne's madness, seeping through the walls, looking for a new host. The phenomenon began to change, to evolve. It started a week after my visit to the archives. I was in my kitchen, making coffee, when I heard it. Tap, 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 tap. It was quiet, but it wasn't coming from number 114. It was coming from inside my own living room wall. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips. I strained my ears, telling myself I was imagining it. But there it was again, a faint, dry knock from within the plaster. It was testing the perimeter, breaching my defenses. I called my only close friend, Leo. He was the epitome of a pragmatist, a financial analyst who believed the only spirits worth talking about were the ones in a cocktail. I tried to explain what was happening, my voice tight with a panic I was struggling to conceal. I told him about the house, the tapping, the journal. He listened patiently. "Art, buddy," he said, his voice oozing with condescending concern. "You just moved. You're working too much. You're isolated out there. You're stressed. Your brain is playing tricks on you." He agreed to come over that weekend to debunk the ghost. He arrived on Saturday afternoon, and we sat in my living room. Of course, the house was perfectly silent. He checked the walls, knocked on them himself, and declared them solid. "See? Nothing," he said with a triumphant grin. "It's just the stress. You need to get out more." His refusal to believe, his calm, rational dismissal of my terror, was more isolating than the silence itself. I was alone in my nightmare, and the world outside was convinced I was asleep. After Leo left, the activity escalated. The tapping became a mobile entity. I would hear it in the pipes under the sink, in the floorboards of the attic, in the frame of my bedroom door. It was a constant, shifting presence, herding me, penning me in. It was a psychological assault, designed to dismantle my sanity piece by piece. My work, once my refuge, became impossible. How could I write code when I was counting the seconds between taps, waiting for the rhythm to start up again? My clients sent worried emails, then frustrated ones. I stopped answering. The outside world began to fade away, its colors turning gray and muted. My reality was now confined to the space between my house and the rotting corpse of number 114. One evening, I saw something. I was staring out my office window at the Thorne place, as I did every night, when I saw a flicker of light in one of the boarded-up upstairs windows. Not a light bulb, but a wavering, pale luminescence like a candle flame. It appeared for a moment, then vanished. My heart hammered against my ribs. It knew I was watching. The psychological warfare was escalating into a direct confrontation. The entity, the echo, whatever it was no longer content to just make noise. It wanted to be seen. The final straw came when I tried to flee. I packed a bag, threw it in my car, and drove away from Sycamore Lane, not caring where I went. I just had to get away. I made it to the highway, the feeling of relief washing over me. But as I merged into traffic, the car's engine sputtered and died, completely dead. I was stranded on the shoulder, watching the cars speed past. When the tow truck finally came, the driver, a grizzled old man, took one look under the hood. "Well, that's weird," he grunted. "Your battery cable is completely disconnected, almost like someone unscrewed it." I had the car towed back to my house. I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that it wouldn't have mattered. The thing that haunted Sycamore Lane had set its hooks in me. The street was my prison now. My sanity was unraveling. I stopped sleeping, subsisting on coffee and fear. I started talking to myself, sometimes responding to the taps as Elias had. "What do you want?" Tap. "To be let out?" Tap. I was losing the fight. The membrane between my world and Elias Thorne's madness was dissolving, and I was being pulled through to the other side. The lessons I was learning were terrifying. Curiosity is a hook, knowledge is a trap, and some presences do not want to be remembered. They want to be repeated. The descent was absolute. My world shrank to the four walls of my house and the looming shadow of the one next door. Days and nights blurred into a continuous gray twilight of paranoia. I was no longer a software engineer. I was a prisoner, a listener, a man waiting for the next beat in a symphony of dread. The tapping was now a constant presence in my own home, a heartbeat in the bones of the building. It was the first thing I heard when I woke up, and the last thing I heard before I drifted into brief nightmare-ridden sleep. I had come to understand its language not as a code, but as an erosion. It wasn't trying to tell me something. It was trying to wear me down, to sand away the layers of my identity until only the fear remained. The final phase of my torment began when the tapping was joined by a new sound, a faint, dry scratching. It came from the wall that my bedroom shared with the empty air between our houses. It sounded like fingernails dragging on old, splintered wood. It was the sound of something wanting to get in. I knew I had only two choices left: let the madness consume me entirely, or confront it. To sit and wait was to accept a slow, psychological death. The memory of Elias Thorne's final scrawled words echoed in my mind. I must let her out. He had broken. He had gone to the source. Perhaps in that final act, he had found some kind of release, however horrific. It was a desperate, insane gamble, but it was the only move I had left. Armed with a heavy-duty flashlight and a crowbar I'd bought months ago for home repairs, I waited for the deepest point of the night. At 3 a.m., when the world was utterly still, I slipped out of my house and crossed the blighted yard to number 114. The front door was swollen shut, but a ground floor window, its boards already rotting, gave way with a groan of splintering wood under the force of the crowbar. I climbed inside. The air was thick and cold, carrying the stench of mold and decay. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight like frantic spirits. The silence inside the house was absolute, a profound and heavy void that felt more terrifying than the sounds that had tormented me. I moved through the skeletal remains of a living room, past furniture draped in white shrouds of dust. My light cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper and water stains on the ceiling that looked like grotesque maps of forgotten continents. Following the descriptions from Elias's journal, I found the door to the cellar. It opened with a high-pitched shriek of rusty hinges. The steps down were stone, slick with dampness. The cellar was colder still, a pocket of unnatural winter. My breath plumed in front of me. The beam of my flashlight played over damp stone walls, cobwebs as thick as cotton, and the earthen floor. And there, in the far corner, was exactly what the journal had described. A section of the wall crudely bricked over, the mortar a different color from the rest. The source. As I approached it, the scratching sound began. It was loud now, right behind the bricks, frantic, desperate. It was the sound of a trapped animal. My fear was a physical thing, a cold knot in my stomach, but my desperation was stronger. I wedged the tip of the crowbar into a crack and heaved. A brick came loose, falling to the dirt floor with a soft thud. I worked frantically, pulling brick after brick away, the scratching growing louder, more frenzied with each one I removed. Finally, I had created an opening large enough to see through. I shined my light into the darkness beyond. It wasn't a hidden room. It was a small, dark cavity, barely a crawl space. And inside, sitting on the dirt floor, was a single object, a small, antique wooden chest. The scratching stopped. The sudden silence was a physical blow. I reached in, my hands trembling, and pulled the chest out. It was lighter than I expected. There was no lock. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not a skeleton, not a forgotten relic, but an old, reel-to-reel tape recorder. A single loop of dark brown tape was threaded through the heads. As I stared at it, a click echoed in the silence of the cellar, and the reels began to slowly, almost imperceptibly, turn. Elias Thorne hadn't been haunted by a ghost. He had been haunted by himself. He had manufactured his own ghost, a monument to his grief, a recording of a sound, a tapping, a scratching, that he had created himself. He had bricked it up in the wall, a perpetual motion machine of sorrow. He hadn't vanished. He had simply left his madness behind to keep running on a loop, waiting for a new audience. As this realization dawned on me, a new sound began. It came from the tape recorder itself, from beneath the turning spools. It was not a recording. It was a low, guttural whisper, a dry and ancient voice that slithered out of the speaker and coiled in the freezing air around me. It said my name, Arthur. I don't remember running. I only remember the blinding light of the morning sun as I stood, gasping for breath, in the middle of my own lawn. I left that day. I abandoned the house and everything in it. I sold it through a lawyer, taking a catastrophic loss, never telling them why. I moved to a high-rise apartment in the center of the busiest city I could find, a place where there is no silence. I am surrounded by the constant roar of traffic, the wail of sirens, the noise of a million lives being lived all at once. It is my shield. I am no longer the man of logic and reason who moved to Sycamore Lane. I am a survivor, a witness. I carry the scar of that cellar, the knowledge that the deepest darkness is not from beyond the grave, but from the intricate, broken machinery of the human heart, and that sometimes, when we build a monument to our pain, it develops a life and a voice of its own. Most nights, the noise of the city is enough. But sometimes, in the dead of night, during a lull in the traffic or a pause between sirens, a moment of profound quiet will fall. In those moments, I hear it. It is not a tapping. It is not a scratching. It is a whisper, faint and dry, that seems to come from every dark corner of my apartment at once, and it is always waiting to say my name.